Thanks very much, Susan, and thanks everybody for your presentations to date. And almost what this presentation is doing is a bit of a wrap up to some extent. But we're looking at this is from our current ARC or ARC, as Cassie called it. Looking at, and what we're presenting here is an analytical framework that we've developed from a literature review, and you'll see Susan's name here and Chris's name here. Who else is here? So anyway, there's a large team doing it. So this is the team across 4 states, 6 universities now. Just some general things that I wanted to pick out in relation to out-of-field teaching. Australia has actually become a bit of a hotspot internationally for research on out-of-field teaching, partly because of some work that Paul Weldon did in 2016 that actually showed the numbers. And then from there's been various research, there's been various government action across different states, and lots of theorising in the literature, and also the TAS Collective helps a lot, and we've got lots of people coming. And Connie's just joined us. Yep, Connie's here too. And so what we're focusing on in this project is what we're calling professional education, the notion of upskilling programs as well as those professional learning opportunities. And the difficulty, what we've found is that they can have limited impact because in areas where cultural norms within schools and the education system don't value teacher specialisation or the need to re-specialise, and we just had that conversation. So this cultural response is a product of the way specialisation is recognised, monitored, how data is collected, how teachers are registered, and the policies that underpin those, and then the various teacher and school improvement structures and practices that underpin it too. So, and I also want to acknowledge that, of course, out-of-field teachers are a heterogeneous group, as we have discussed so far. So, yes, there's various ways of thinking about teachers in terms of qualification and specialisation. You can look at it in terms of stability of load, ideas around identity, capability, competence, and agency in that as well. Possible pathways, impacts on how their in-fieldness, and then the school context and culture of support, as we've already discussed. So the aim of this project was to model an ecology of an ecosystem that would shift the cultural norms that currently undervalue re-specialisation of out-of-field teachers' professional education. So we're looking at what an ideal ecosystem would look like. So we're looking at science, maths, English, and humanities. So it's across different subjects in terms of the ecosystem, looking at what factors influence teacher uptake, and also what is the ecology of an ecosystem, therefore, that values that diverse pathways towards becoming in-field or less out-of-field. So we're using 2 frames. One is ecological systems theory from Bronfenbrenner and reflexivity theory. We're going to be talking about Bronfenbrenner's ideas today. And we're basing this on the assumption that teachers and schools are more likely to value and engage with professional education, and therefore reduce the incidence of teaching out of field when there are defined pathways to becoming in field. So just to introduce Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, it's a theory that's been applied in social research and increasingly in education research. It seems to be popping up quite a lot at the moment. And it's a recognised, it recognises that there's multiple systems that are at play. You've got your immediate context of individuals the context in which they're interacting, and then you've got these larger systems that come into play. So policy, cultural attitudes, historical influences change over time. So it is enabling us to look at the complex and interrelated relationships and dependencies between and within systems. And we're integrating multiple perspectives, therefore, from across the professional education ecosystems, including principals, teachers, PE providers, subject associations, governing bodies and education systems, as well as different policies, universities and others. So just as a quick 101 in the into Bronfenbrenner's ideas, these are we're looking at it in terms of the out-of-field teacher themselves, and then you've got your microsystems in which they operate. So this is where the immediate relationships occur. Then you've got your mesosystem, which is looking at the relationships and impacts between different systems, the microsystems. And so it's looking at relationships and processes, effects of those relationships. And we're also, that's where we're sort of situating that desirability and uptake of PE. Exosystem is the organization's processes, policies that sit outside of those microsystems. And then you've got your macrosystem, which is your cultural values and beliefs. And then you've got your chronosystem, which sort of captures the change over time. And we're particularly recognizing the workforce changes there, and also to some extent the career trajectories of teachers. So this is our project methodology, beginning with a literature and policy review. Then we've got 3 different studies that are going to play out over the next 2.5 years. An interview study which will look at the features that are come into play. And then a national study that's going to look at the scope of those features, and then a Delphi study that is going to help us to come out with that, to imagineer or come up with an ideal ecosystem. What I'm going to report on today is the literature and policy review. So the aim of the literature and policy review was to identify what the literature currently is saying. So what are the key elements that we can see so far within different areas? So and to ascertain the state-based factors. So there's various factors that are coming into play here. We've got state, because we've got 4 different states, and we've got different subject areas. So the documents that we've analysed sit within policies that we figure are relevant, subject associations that relate to out of field or mention whether they mention out of field or not, universities and professional education opportunities that we can locate, and then a review of the research literature. So the process I went through was to summarise the key ideas emerging, identify codes, and then that led to some factors. And so this is our new analytical framework that's going to underpin the research. This is sort of familiar to some, if people have actually looked at that definitions document, this is also part of that document as a structure, but we've modified it and added a few things. So there are 6 different broad categories of factors that we identified. Then within each of those, there are several factors, and they all interact with the ecosystems in different ways. And sitting in the middle there is the out-of-field teacher. And what I wanted to do today is to look specifically at professional education and the public discourse, and just bring that into the conversation just because of time. We've got, just looking at the time. So in terms of the professional education, when we looked at the policy, we were able to see the support that out-of-field teachers received. Could look at the professional learning, the structures of the professional learning development, and some relationships to school improvement. In terms of the subject association, we got a much better sense of the different types of supports that are on offer. and the way funding is being used to understand that, and then really got a sense actually of the partnerships between sectors. When we looked at what the universities were doing, there was a sense of again, the different types of support, but they're a little bit different to what the subject associations are doing. And there was a bit more of a sense of understanding the balancing those work family relationships. That's just what came out in the documents. And there was some degree of research and data related to professional education in those documents, and more of a understanding around the funding, scholarships associated with it, school CRT support. And then when we looked at the literature, there was a sense of the supports that were available in terms of CPD in particular, that sort of introduced that language. Supports also were, I guess I separated it out here to look at also what was occurring within schools, and it became very clear when you look at the literature how important that support, informal support in the schools is. And also there is a better sense of the professional learning uptake patterns and how accessible it is. In terms of the public discourse theme, this is sort of relates to how you respond. So policies will talk about teacher shortfall and workforce challenges and issues around recruitment, teacher capacity building. We need to do that. We need to fix teachers. Better data and information is needed for out-of-field teachers, and also representing it as a problem of quality and practice. Subject associations, though, raise also awareness to the teacher shortfall and workforce, but they don't see that it's their role to fix the workforce challenges, but it is their role to support teachers and schools. In terms of universities and PL providers, they recognise the shortfall and workforce challenges, the need to build teacher capacity, and also out of field as a problem of quality and practice that they feel that they can respond to. And then in terms of the literature, there was this notion of scale and problem, that there's a system-wide issue, and also raises the question of actually who's responsible for fixing this. So these grey items here, I didn't talk about those, but they're the ones that weren't mentioned within those. So to some extent, you see the silences that are occurring from each of those different stakeholder groups. So the next thing we did then was to map those things against a state, or a current state map, basically. And we did that within 3 sort of areas: workplace, professional education, and initial teacher education. We've got the teacher sitting in the middle here. We've got different microsystems that are occurring. So the idea of a school, or things that are happening at school and how that interacts with the workforce. You've got your ideas around professional education and the uptake, determining uptake and mediating factors in the various people, and ideas around the attitudes and values that are informing that professional education. And then, of course, what determines out-of-field teaching right from the beginning is their initial teacher education. So that's looking at, you know, what happens within ITE in terms of their teacher preparation, what issues are occurring, you know, where do you see out-of-field teaching occurring, and how does that relate to the policies and changes within the initial teacher education workforce or policies. Now, from this, what we recognised was that basically you've got 3 different pathways to becoming in-field here to some extent, or at least being less out of field. But just having a closer look at the professional education factors, these mediating factors determining uptake of PE are interesting to sort of look at. The notion of attitudes and learning behaviours of teachers, what agency they have within the system to access, availability of the PE. and how accessible it is, particularly if rural, how whether they've got permission from principals to attend, how attainable that learning is. So we saw an example of a teacher who felt that it wasn't really, they weren't ready for it, or it was not at their level. How applicable and appropriate is it for an out-of-field subject? And so when you have a look at the ecosystem here, you've got your partnerships between university associations, governments, and other organisations. You've got these subject associations that play a really critical role. You've got governments who provide funding and who interact with these other organisations and institutions. Research plays an important role. And then you've got these really interesting attitudes around subject specialisation and what that means, who's responsible, what determines engagement and support, and then your attitudes to commitment to data for monitoring and measuring the effects of professional learning. I'll shift now to the Y model, which picks up on this idea of 3 different sort of pathways to becoming in field or less out of field. So we've got this initial teacher education that determines you're out of field by specialisation and qualification. And when you think about whether a teacher is qualified or not, you've got a sense of, it becomes a deficit position as to whether they're qualified or not. When you look at professional education, it provides that opportunity. So it's an opportunity position if you start looking at what's available and how can we provide professional education. And then when you start looking at your workplace and what can be done within the workplace, what supportive practices are there, what attitudes underpin that, what's the cultures of support in school, it deals with that tolerance position that principals can show towards, principals and schools might have and teachers have towards the practice of assigning teachers to teach out of field. Also in that, of course, right in the middle of that is the teacher. But what we're looking at here is not so much the experience of the teacher, but what's happening in that ecosystem. And so within that, where do we go from here? What might an ideal model look like then? So some factors that we might consider is the nature of the different subjects and how it might look in terms of the role of subject associations in universities. Are subject associations setting a standard of teaching specific certain content and teaching? Are there standards, for example, and could they be leveraged in some way? Do we need a shift from anecdote to evidence and data, which in some contexts there's not much data to really work with? Is it about raising awareness? Is it about cross-sector collaboration and partnerships? Is it about recognising and tending to silences from each of those stakeholder groups? And then also looking for maybe connections between those 3 different pathways. So where do we go from here? What we're looking for is not one solution. But when you start looking ecologically, it's not about one program funded by the government. It's not about one program run by subject associations. It's looking at what range of things can be available for multiple pathways to becoming in field. We have some next stage of data collection, which is the interview study. So we've used the analytical framework to inform our interview questions. And I thank the various people on our reference committee here who have informed that. So that's Lewis, Stephen, Helen. Who else is in the room? I think that's all I can see just quickly. And then capturing the effects across the school, subjects and states is going to be really important. So looking at what teachers are teaching and how they upskill. And so a lot of the things that we've been talking about, I think will factor into the way we sort of move from here. and ultimately dealing with that question of how might we then imagineer an ecosystem that values the diverse pathways. So that's it. I think I'm right on time. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. And here is contact details for us if you know a program or policy that you think would be relevant for us to consider further in our project, then please reach out. And there's just more information generally. So thank you.